I opened my eyes at 5:30 a.m. Straight away, I felt as if a thick fog had left, and I could suddenly think straight. My breasts were swollen, so I took the time to express some milk. And that was when the terrible reality of my situation struck me. I began fully aware of the state I was in and the mental health issues I was suffering from. I knew that I had not been myself over the last few weeks. I could understand clearly why I was in hospital and why I needed treatment. I was unable to look after Elliot by myself because of my mental illness, a mood disorder related to the postpartum period. Sadness flooded over me. What I had feared for years was now coming true. I was so affected by mental illness that I was losing touch with reality. I can't explain why, but I had been afraid for a long time that I would be affected by mental illness one day. What I dreaded the most was schizophrenia, as I knew that people suffering from it can lose touch with reality. Although I knew I wasn't suffering from that particular illness, the simple matter of acknowledging that I was not in control of my mental state was extremely distressing. I was losing the independence I needed to look after my child properly. To be a proper mother, I now had to rely on medicine and the people around me. This was hard to accept. In this moment of discovery, all I could do was cry. A grief process was beginning. Through my tears, I finished expressing my milk and then called for a nurse to put it in the fridge. The lady who answered my call found me in a pitiable state. Between sobs, I tried to make her understand my distress by explaining how I was now aware of the postpartum disorder I was suffering from. She must have been informed about it, because she tried to console me by telling me that I was going to recover and that I would end up feeling better. No doubt wanting to avoid leaving me crying alone and keen to take my mind off things, she suggested I join her and the other nurses where they were working. She offered me a chair next to two other nurses. One of them was working at her computer and making idle chit-chat about nothing in particular. When she saw me sobbing, she tried to encourage me to stop crying by saying it would not make things any better. But I could not stop, and this advice only made me feel misunderstood. I needed to talk about my suffering, and I especially needed someone to take the time to listen. Although the nurses tried several times to include me in their conversations, I did not feel like I belonged there. Not long after, I decided to head back to my room. Since I had stopped crying, the nurses did not object. Once I was back in my room, I sat down on my bed and grabbed a few sheets of paper. Instead of calling my husband and my mother and waking them up so early, I started to do what I knew would be the most useful for the moment, putting my suffering and distress down in words. And here is what I wrote. October 3rd, 6:15 a.m. Medication taken for the first time last night at 9:15 p.m. I woke up to extract my milk. Now I realize I'm a lot more conscious of what is happening and has happened to me. It is so hard to accept. I called the nurse to put my milk away. I had to wait many minutes. Of course, I guess they are thinking I don't have a hold my head because the patients of this floor are all sick, with mental sickness that makes them act weird. It is really painful for me to see in the nurses' eyes that they are wondering if what I'm saying is true, especially with the nurses who don't know my condition exactly because they have not read it. They seem to understand after I explain to them or they read my record. But still, I feel that some of them are not fully understanding. A few are very compassionate though. That's so helpful. One nurse, the one at the computer, told me to stop crying. It won't help me, she said, to feel better. I disagree so much. I told her it is extremely good to express my feelings and emotions. I had to tell her that twice. She did not look convinced at all. She kind of acknowledged, but that does not help me at all. I don't need people to say that everything will be fine. I need people to look at me and take the time, or try at least, to listen, really listen to what I have to say. I don't want them to treat me as a victim, nor someone that is mentally sick. I know I have a mental condition, but that does not mean that I can be treated differently than a normal person. Am I a normal person now? Now that I need medication to act like a normal person? I'm so scared and preoccupied not to be and feel like myself anymore because of the medication. I'm feeling much better than the precious days, thank God. I've just seen that I wrote precious days instead of previous days. Yes, precious days. Not the days when I acted so sick. The days where and when I was not sick. These days were and are precious. Will I ever be able to feel like before, like the good days? I'm scared not to be myself anymore for the rest of my life. I will maybe feel and or be better than all the years before, but I'm wondering if I will feel comfortable with who I am, who will be. 6:50. Not long after I finished writing this text, breakfast was served. After I ate, I called my husband to find out what time he would be arriving at the hospital. I was really looking forward to seeing him and telling him how I was feeling and getting him to read what I had written. It wasn't long before he arrived with my mother and Elliot, who had once again had a good night with them. He didn't seem troubled by my absence at night. I found this really reassuring. Gerhard took the time to read what I had written, and he noticed that I seemed much better than the day before. My words were more coherent, and my mood more stable. Nevertheless, towards the end of the morning, I began to feel worse. I started going from a positive frame of mind to being short-tempered and crying. My memories of the time are a little hazy, but I remember my irritability very well. My mother, who was worrying about me, encouraged me to rest and get some sleep at the same time as Elliot. But I stubbornly refused to do so. I didn't feel tired, and my mother's warnings, which I saw as overprotective, really irritated me. And when she wanted to help with looking after Elliot, I took it personally. I felt she didn't think I was capable of looking after my son properly. I was exasperated, and I was rather short with her. At one point, I became aware of how oversensitive I was being, and I apologized for my attitude and for all the future times I was probably going to be irritated by what she said. I was aware that I was not completely myself, and I didn't want to hurt her. Instead of getting some sleep, I was busy giving updates about my condition to close friends and family. Gerhard had brought my laptop with him, and I was anxious to reply to emails from friends whom I had told the day before about being hospitalized for a postpartum mood disorder. It did me good to read their messages and know they were thinking of me. Nevertheless, I found it hard to hold myself back when I was sending emails. And since I was writing in French, Gerhard could not understand what I was saying. He started getting a little worried, especially when my mood got worse as the hours went on. After I received an email which I took rather badly, Gerhard got me to put my laptop to one side. I was excessively and uncharacteristically frustrated. I was nevertheless convinced that my feelings were appropriate for the situation and that I should express them to the person concerned. He made me promise that I will not reply to any emails without reading them out to him first. I was annoyed by this constraint at the time, but I trusted him enough to agree to his request.